The dust had teeth that year. Calder Boone felt them gnawing at his face as he rode into Dust Mercy, one hand shielding his scarred right eye from the grit that swirled like angry ghosts between the weathered buildings. The town squatted on the edge of nowhere, New Mexico territory, where the earth cracked like old leather and hope came dear as water. He'd heard about the water rights before he'd heard about anything else. In Dust Mercy, a man without a wife was a man without a well. The town council had made that clear in their peculiar ordinance. Only established households could tap into the communal water system. It was 1882, and progress had its own strange rules out here where civilization ended and survival began. The mare beneath him snorted, shaking dust from her mane. Calder patted her neck, feeling the grit beneath his palm. "Easy, Rosie, we're almost there." Delaney's general store stood like a fortress of commerce, its false front reaching toward a sky that hadn't seen proper rain in 3 months. Calder tied Rosie to the post and stepped onto the boardwalk, his spurs singing a lonely tune. Inside, the store smelled of pickle brine and gun oil. Josiah Delaney looked up from his ledger, his merchant smile spreading like spilled molasses. "Well now, if it ain't the famous Calder Boone." Just Calder. He removed his hat, dust cascading from its brim. "Looking for land? Heard you might know what's available." Delaney's eyes glittered. "Land's one thing, water's another. You know our ways here." "I heard." "Good, good." Delaney came around the counter, his boots heavy on the plank floor. "Reverend Hartley and I, we've been discussing your situation. Man of your reputation deserves a proper welcome." Calder's jaw tightened. The Dry Creek incident followed him like a shadow, 5 dead when the dynamite shed exploded, though he'd been cleared of wrongdoing. Some stories, true or not, stuck like tar. "I'm not looking for charity." "Course not." Delaney's smile never wavered. "But a man needs roots. A wife. We might could help with that. There's a widow. Owns the old McCarty place. Quiet woman. Keeps to herself since her husband passed." Before Calder could respond, the door burst open. A young rider stumbled in, face white beneath the dirt. "Storm coming, big one," saw Pedro's crew trapped out by Devil's Wash. The comfortable store erupted into motion. Men grabbed ropes, water skins, bandanas. Calder didn't think he moved, following the flow of bodies back into the rising wind. The storm hit like a fist. Sand became a living wall, turning day to twilight. Calder pulled his bandana up, squinting through the brown haze. Shapes moved in the murk riders, horses, men shouting directions lost in the howl. He found them by the screaming. 3 cowboys huddled against an overturned wagon, their horses gone. The sand had buried the wheels, trapping one man's leg. Calder dismounted, fighting the wind for every step. "Pull when I lift." He braced against the wagon bed, muscles straining. The trapped man, barely more than a boy, whimpered through gritted teeth. Together they hauled him free, sand already filling the depression where he'd been. "Can't make town," someone shouted. "Too far." Calder knew these storms. They could last hours. Strip skin from bone. "The McCarty place, it's closest." Nobody argued. They made a strange procession through the brown hell, 6 men, 3 horses, moving by instinct and prayer. Calder led, not because he knew the way, but because he'd learned to navigate by the feel of the land beneath his boots. The farmhouse materialized like a ship in fog, small, weathered, but solid. Calder pounded on the door, ready to break it down if needed. It opened. She stood there like she'd been waiting, a woman neither young nor old, with steady gray eyes and flower in her dark hair. She took in the crowd of desperate men without flinching. "Bring him in," she said simply, stepping aside. They laid the injured boy on her kitchen table. Eloise McCarty, for that's who she had to be moved with quiet efficiency. Heating water, tearing clean cloth. Her hands were sure as she cleaned sand from the wound, working by lamplight while the storm raged against the walls. "Hold him still," she murmured. Calder found himself at the boy's shoulders, watching her work. She had strong hands, farmer's hands. A thin gold ring caught the light on her left hand. The storm screamed for 3 hours. They huddled in her small kitchen, sharing water she could ill afford to give. When talk turned to payment, she shook her head. Storm's payment enough for anyone. When it finally passed, leaving the world scoured and strange, the men filed out with mumbled thanks. The injured boy could ride, his leg wrapped tight. Calder lingered on the porch, hat in hand. "Thank you, ma'am." She studied him, those gray eyes seeing too much. "You're the one they talk about, from Dry Creek." He waited for the accusation, the fear. "Instead," she said, "you lifted that wagon true. Miguel won't forget." Inside, something dusty in Calder's chest stirred. "Your husband?" 2 winters passed. Lung fever. She said it flat, like stating the weather. "I keep the place running." He saw it then, the sagging fence, the thin cattle, the stubborn set of her shoulders against the weight of it all. Must be hard, without water rights. Her laugh was dry as the land. "Everything's hard out here, Mr. Boone, but it's mine." He settled his hat, touched the brim. "Calder, just Calder." "Eloise." She almost smiled. "Though I expect you knew that." Walking back to his mare, Calder felt the ground shift beneath him, subtle as sand resettling after a storm. He'd come to Dust Mercy for land and water, for a chance to stop running from shadows. He'd expected obstacles, negotiations, maybe trouble. He hadn't expected her. That night in his room above the saloon, Calder sat by the window watching dust devils dance in the moonlight. Delaney's words echoed quiet woman, but Calder had seen the steel beneath the quiet, the way she'd moved through crisis like she'd been born to it. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Reverend Hartley stood in the hallway, tall and severe in his black coat despite the heat. "Mr. Boone, I trust you've settled in." "Well enough." "Good, good." Hartley's smile was thin as paper. "Josiah mentioned you met the widow McCarty. Providence, one might say, that storm driving you to her door." "One might." "She's struggled since her loss. The town worries." Hartley stepped closer, bringing the smell of pomade and righteousness. "A woman alone, trying to run a farm. It's not natural, not proper." Calder said nothing. "We've tried to help, of course. Suggested she might sell, move to town, find appropriate work. But she's proud." Hartley sighed theatrically. "Pride goeth before a fall, as the book says." "What do you want, Reverend?" I want what's best for everyone. You need water rights that requires a wife. She needs a husband's protection. The town needs stability." His eyes glittered in the lamplight. "A quiet bride for a man seeking quiet life. Beneficial all around." After Hartley left, Calder stood at the window again. Out there in the darkness, Eloise McCarty was probably checking her stock, mending what the storm broke, doing what needed doing. Quiet, maybe, but quiet like the earth before thunder, like the pause before a rattler strikes. They promised him a quiet bride. Somehow, Calder doubted that's what he'd find. The morning after the storm, Dust Mercy looked like it had been scrubbed with steel wool. Sand drifts leaned against buildings like drunken men, and the air tasted of grit and defeat. Calder stood outside Delaney's store, watching merchants sweep their boardwalks in a ritual as old as the territory itself. $20 for a sack of flour. Delaney's voice carried through the open door. "Take it or leave it. Mrs. McCarty." Calder stepped inside to find Eloise at the counter, her back straight as a fence post. The price was robbery double what it should be. "That's twice what you charged last month," she said quietly. "Supply and demand," Delaney shrugged. "Storm damaged my stock. Everyone's suffering." Calder glanced at the full shelves, the unmarked sacks in the corner. Funny how suffering's got a sliding scale. Delaney's smile faltered. This is a private transaction, Mr. Boone. Just observing the local commerce. Calder picked up a tin of crackers, checking the price. Interesting how these are still 2 bits, same as yesterday. Eloise turned, and their eyes met. Something passed between them, not gratitude exactly, but recognition. She placed coins on the counter with deliberate precision. $15, she said, same as last month, or I'll take my business to Fort Sumner. That's a day's ride each way. Delaney's face darkened. Dangerous for a woman alone. Then I'd better take a friend. She glanced at Calder. I imagine Mr. Boone knows the route. The silence stretched like taffy. Finally, Delaney swept the coins into his till. 15, this time. Outside, Eloise adjusted the flour sack in her wagon bed. You didn't need to do that. Didn't do anything, just shopping for crackers. She almost smiled. He was learning to watch for it, that slight softening around her eyes. Would you really have ridden to Fort Sumner with me? Still might. I need supplies too. This time the smile reached her mouth, brief as lightning. I have fence posts to set. Storm took down the south line. He should have walked away. Should have minded his own business like he'd learned to do. Instead, I've got time. Her hands stilled on the reins. I can't pay wages. Didn't ask for any. People will talk. People are already talking. She studied him long enough that he felt like a horse at auction. Then she clicked her tongue at the mule. South pasture's a mile out. Try to keep up. The McCarty place looked worse in daylight. The storm had been just the latest blow to a farm already on its knees. Fence posts lay scattered like broken teeth, the chicken coop listed to one side. But the house stood solid, and the small garden beside it showed green shoots despite the drought. They worked in companionable silence. Calder digging post holes while Eloise stretched wire. The sun climbed, brutal as always. When she brought him water, he noticed her watching the horizon, expecting trouble. Always. She wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a smear of dirt. Mr. Delaney doesn't like being challenged. Neither does Reverend Hartley. They seem mighty interested in your welfare. They're interested in my land. It's got the best access to Willow Creek when there's water in it. She took the digging bar from him, attacking the hard earth with practiced fury. My husband knew what he was doing when he claimed this section. By noon, they'd set a dozen posts. Calder's shirt was soaked through, his hands raw despite the calluses. Eloise worked like a man. No, he corrected himself. She worked like someone who had no choice but to work. Hungry. She didn't wait for an answer, leading him to the shade of a cottonwood. From her basket she produced cornbread, hard cheese, and withered apples. This is too much, he said, seeing how carefully she portioned everything. It's dinner. We eat, or we fall down. She bit into her apple with determination. Besides, you're earning it. They ate quietly, watching a hawk circle in the white sky. Finally, Calder asked, Why stay must be easier places for a woman alone. Her jaw tightened. My parents broke this land, planted that cottonwood the year I was born. My husband's buried beyond that rise. She gestured with her apple core. You asking why I won't abandon them? No, ma'am. Guess I'm not. That evening, riding back to town, Calder noticed the looks. Women whispered behind hands. Men nodded knowingly. At the saloon, Abner Pike, the temporary sheriff, was holding court. Saw Boone out at the widow's place. Pike announced to his audience, Working awful close together. Man's got a right to work where he pleases, Calder said mildly. Ordering whiskey. Sure. Pike's smile was ugly. Just saying, some women get a taste for company after being alone. Makes them accommodating. The glass in Calder's hand creaked. He set it down carefully. You got something specific to say, Pike. Me, no, sir. Just observing how fast you two got friendly. Then again, she always was quick to warm up. Ask anyone who knew Tom McCarty. Her husband. Is that what she told you? Pike laughed. Tom found her working a cantina in Las Cruces. Brought her here, tried to make her respectable. But blood tells, don't it? Calder stood slowly. The saloon went quiet. I ever hear you speak ill of that woman again, he said softly. We'll have a problem. Pike's hand drifted toward his gun. You threatening an officer of the law? No threat, just establishing boundaries. Calder drained his whiskey and walked out, feeling crosshairs on his back. The next morning, he found Eloise at the well behind her house, hauling up the bucket hand over hand. Her face was stone. Heard you defended my honor at the saloon. How noble. He heard the edge in her voice, sharp as broken glass. I defended the truth. The truth, she laughed bitterly. Which version? The one where I'm a scheming widow, a cantina girl, or maybe the one where I tricked poor Tom McCarty into marriage? She slammed the bucket down, water sloshing. You don't know anything about me. I know you work harder than any two men. I know you gave water to strangers when you barely have enough. I know. You know what you see, what you want to see. She turned away. I think you should go. He didn't go. Instead, he picked up the bucket, carried it to her kitchen door, set it down gently. My mother worked a boarding house in Missouri. Folks said things about her too. Said she was too friendly with the lodgers, too free with her smiles. He paused. Truth was, she was trying to keep us fed after my father died, but truth never travels as fast as gossip. Eloise stood very still, arms wrapped around herself. You want to know what I see? Calder continued. I see someone holding on with both hands to something that matters. That's all I need to know. She turned then, eyes bright with unshed tears. It gets tiresome, fighting them all. Sometimes I think it would be easier to just let go. Maybe, but I don't think you're built for easy. That almost smile again, fleeting as shade. Neither are you, from what I hear. No, ma'am. Guess we're both contrary that way. That night, fire bloomed on the horizon. Calder saw it from his window, orange light dancing where the McCarty farm lay. He was on Rosie and riding before his mind caught up, following other riders drawn by the smoke. The hayshed was engulfed. Flames reached for the barn, for the chicken coop, for everything Eloise had. She was there with buckets, her neighbors Miguel and his son, the few who'd answered the smoke. Not enough hands, not enough water. They formed a line, passing buckets from the well. Calder's world narrowed to lift. Pass, lift, pass. His hands blistered, his lungs burned. Beside him, Eloise fought like something wild, her face streaked with soot and tears. Just before dawn, they won. The barn stood. The house stood. The hay was gone. Winter feed destroyed. But the structures survived. As the sun rose, Calder noticed boot prints in the ash leading away from the farm, toward town. Deep prints, fresh. Whose boots make marks like that? He asked Miguel quietly. The old man spat. Only one man in town wears boots that heavy, but you didn't hear that from me. Delaney, of course. Eloise sat on her porch steps, staring at the smoldering ruins. Her hands were burned, wrapped in wet cloth, when the neighbors drifted away with mumbled sympathies. Calder sat beside her. I can't prove it, she said dully. Even if I could, who'd listen, the cantina girl crying fire? We'll cut hay from the wild meadows, build back the shed. She looked at him sideways. Are you planning to stay? He thought about it, about the water rights that required a wife, about Delaney and Hartley's plans, about the easy path they'd offered him. Yeah, he said finally. I'm planning to stay. The vultures came with the Morning Post. Calder watched Pike nail the wanted poster to the board outside the sheriff's office, taking his time, making sure everyone saw. The sketch was rough but recognizable. Calder's face stared back at the gathering crowd, accompanied by bold letters, "Wanted for questioning Dry Creek incident." "Now, folks," Pike announced, thumbs hooked in his gun belt. "This here's just a formality. Judge wants to clear up some questions about that unfortunate explosion. Nothing to worry about if a man's got nothing to hide." Reverend Hartley materialized at Pike's shoulder like a bad omen. "The Lord works in mysterious ways. Perhaps this is his method of clarifying matters." Calder felt the town's eyes on him, weighing, judging. He'd been tried and acquitted in Dry Creek, but paper trails had a way of getting lost out here. He touched his hat brim to Pike, smiled without humor. "Always happy to help the law. Sheriff, you know where to find me." He walked to the livery, keeping his pace easy, shoulders loose, inside. Young Nathan "Dusty" Alvarez was mucking stalls, his movements quick and nervous. "Mr. Boone," the boy started, then stopped, glancing around. "Something on your mind, Dusty?" The kid was maybe 17, all knees and elbows, with his mother's Mexican features and his father's Irish stubborn streak. He'd been one of the riders Calder helped save from the storm. "That poster, it ain't right, Mrs. McCarty told me how you helped after the fire. You ain't no dynamiter." "Appreciate that." Dusty moved closer, voice dropping. "Pike was at Delaney's last night. Heard them talking about driving you out. Said once you're gone, the widow won't last a week." "You hear anything else?" "Something about old paperwork, from Dry Creek. Pike said he had a friend could make documents say whatever needed saying." Calder slipped the boy a silver $1. "You've got sharp ears. Keep 'em open, but be careful. These men play rough." Riding out to Eloise's place, Calder felt the noose tightening. He'd left Dry Creek to escape this very shadow, but shadows had long reach when helped along by willing hands. He found Eloise in her garden, on her knees in the dirt, coaxing life from the stubborn earth. She looked up at his approach, reading his face like weather signs. More trouble. "Pike's got a wanted poster up. Claims Dry Creek wants me for questioning." She sat back on her heels, dirty hands resting on her thighs. "Will they come for you?" "Probably." "Then you should go." She said it flat, emotionless. "No sense dying for someone else's land." "That what you think I'm doing?" She stood, brushing dirt from her skirts with sharp, angry movements. "Aren't you the noble gunman? Protecting the poor widow, I've heard that story. It ends with the man dead and the woman still alone." "Eloise." "No." She turned away. "I won't be the excuse they use to put you in the ground. Pack up, ride out, tonight." He caught her arm gently. "What happened to holding on with both hands?" "That's my fight, not yours." "Maybe I'm making it mine." She pulled free, but not before he felt her trembling. "Why? What's here for you but trouble and more trouble?" He couldn't answer that, not in words that made sense. Instead, he said, "Let me at least finish the fence. Give you that much before I decide anything." She studied him with those storm-gray eyes. "You're a fool. Calder Boone." "Been called worse." That afternoon, they worked side by side replacing burned fence rails. The sun hammered down mercilessly. Every time a dust cloud rose on the horizon, they both tensed, waiting for riders. But only the wind came calling. Near sunset, May O'Rourke appeared in her weathered buggy. The Irish woman ran the boarding house in town, a formidable presence with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She climbed down with surprising agility for her 60 years. "Brought supper," she announced, lifting a covered pot. "Figured you'd be too busy for cooking." "Mrs. O'Rourke, you didn't need to," Eloise began. "Hush, child. It's stew. Nothing fancy." May's eyes found Calder. "You'd be the man causing all the fuss in town." "Seems so, ma'am." "Good." She smiled grimly. "About time someone gave those buzzards something to squawk about. Now, where can an old woman sit, my bones are complaining?" They ate on the porch as purple twilight settled over the land. May's stew was thick with vegetables and chunks of beef charity disguised as neighborliness. "Known Eloise since she was knee-high," May said, apropos of nothing. "Her parents were good people, came here with nothing but grit and hope, built this place board by board." "Mrs. O'Rourke," Eloise murmured, embarrassed. "Let me talk. Girl, this man should know what ground he's standing on." May fixed Calder with a stare. Tom McCarty wasn't a bad man, but he wasn't strong. When the lung fever took him, some expected Eloise to fold, sell out, move to town and take in washing or some such nonsense. Instead, she got stronger. Calder said, "Like iron in the forge." May nodded approvingly. But that threatened certain parties, a woman managing alone. Successfully, it gives other women ideas, makes men question the natural order. The natural order, according to Hartley and Delaney. You're learning. May stood, joints creaking. "That poster's got folks stirred up, but not everyone believes they're poison. You've got friends, both of you. Don't forget that when the storm breaks." After she left, Eloise and Calder sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge like scattered salt. Finally, she spoke. "She's right. You do have friends. Dusty Alvarez speaks well of you. The Rodriguez family, too, after you helped save Miguel. And you." She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. "Then Tom found me in Las Cruces. That much of Pike's story was true, but I wasn't working a cantina. I was teaching at the mission school. My parents had died of fever, and the sisters took me in." She paused. "Tom was hauling freight, got robbed and beaten half to death outside town. The sisters nursed him. That's how we met." "Doesn't sound like a scandal to me." "No, an orphan girl marrying a freight hauler 20 years her senior, moving to a place where nobody knew her history. It was easy for people to fill in the blanks with their own dirt." "People see what they want to see." "Yes." She turned to look at him directly. "What do you see when you look at me?" "Calder." He thought about it, choosing his words carefully. "I see someone who makes hard ground yield crops, who shares water she can't spare, who fights fires until her hands blister and goes back to work the next day." He met her gaze. "I see strength that's got nothing to do with muscle and everything to do with will." Something shifted in her face. For a moment, the armor cracked, showing the woman beneath tired, lonely, but unbroken. Then she stood abruptly. "It's late. You should go." But as he mounted Rosie, she called out softly, "Calder, be careful riding back. These roads. Anything could happen in the dark." He heard the warning beneath the words. "I'll take the long way. Less predictable." She nodded and went inside, but he saw her shadow at the window, watching until he was out of sight. The ambush came at Skeleton Ridge. Calder sensed it before he saw them, that prickle between the shoulder blades that had saved his life more than once. He pulled Rosie up short just as the first shot cracked through the darkness, sparking off the rocks where he would have been. 3 of them, maybe 4. He rolled from the saddle, slapping Rosie's rump to send her running, hit the ground hard, scrambled for cover behind a fallen cottonwood. "That's far enough." "Boone?" Pike's voice, trying for authority but edged with nerves. "Come quiet-like, and nobody gets hurt." Calder checked his Colt, counted cartridges. "Seems like somebody's already trying to hurt me." "Pike." "Just a warning shot judge wants you for questioning, that's all." What judge would that be, the one Delaney keeps in his pocket? "Another shot. Closer this time. Not Pike, someone steadier. More professional." Calder fired back, aiming high, buying time to think. The ridge was narrow here. Steep drops on both sides. But if he could reach the rocks... He moved, staying low. Bullets followed, chewing splinters from the log. Someone cursed Pike again, his town sheriff mask slipping. These weren't lawmen making an arrest. These were hired guns doing wet work. Calder made the rocks, breathing hard. His ribs scraped against stone, and wetness spread across his shirt. Not a bullet, a flying piece of wood had laid him open like a whip. He pressed his bandana against the wound, gritting his teeth. "He's hit!" someone yelled. "Saw him go down!" Footsteps approached, cautious but eager. Calder waited, patient as a snake. When the first man rounded the boulder, Calder struck with the gun butt, dropping him cold. The second man fired wild, the muzzle flash blinding in the darkness. Calder, shot by instinct, heard the grunt and thud of a body falling. "Stand down," Pike's voice cracked. "Boone, you just shot a deputy. You mean a bushwhacker." Calder was moving again, circling toward where he'd heard Pike. Real lawmen don't ambush travelers in the dark. He found Pike crouched behind his horse, sweating despite the cool night air. The temporary sheriff's badge gleamed like a target on his chest. "Drop the iron, Pike." Pike's hand twitched toward his gun. Calder fired, the bullet catching Pike's shoulder, spinning him into the dirt. The gun flew from nerveless fingers. "You're crazy," Pike gasped, clutching his shoulder. "They'll hang you for this." "Maybe." Calder kicked Pike's gun away, then knelt to check the wound. Clean through, missing the bone. "But you'll live to see it, which is more than you planned for me." He found Rosie grazing peacefully down the trail, unimpressed by human violence. The ride back to Eloise's place was a blur of pain and determination. He needed somewhere safe, somewhere to think, to plan. She answered the door with a shotgun, then dropped it when she saw him swaying in the saddle. "Inside," she ordered. "Quickly." She worked by lamplight, cleaning the gash along his ribs with gentle efficiency. Her hands were steady, but he saw the fear in her eyes. "How bad?" "Pike and 2 others, maybe 3. Left Pike breathing. Don't know about the rest." She tied off the bandage with sharp, angry movements. "They'll come here, you know that." "I know. I'm sorry. Eloise, I've brought you nothing but trouble." "Stop!" She cupped his face with one hand, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You think I don't know why they want you gone? You think I don't understand what happens to me once you're out of the way?" Her thumb traced the scar near his eye. "We're past apologies. Calder, now we decide if we fight or run." He covered her hand with his and, "What do you want to do?" "For answer." She stood and barred the door, then loaded both barrels of the shotgun. "This is my home. My parents' blood is in this soil. Tom's buried on that hill. I'm done running from small men with big plans." Despite everything, the pain, the danger, the certainty of violence to come, Calder smiled. "Then we make our stand. Together." Together. Outside, coyotes sang to the stars, and the wind whispered promises of the storm to come. The church bell rang at dawn, but it wasn't calling folks to worship. Calder stood at Eloise's kitchen window, watching dust rise on the horizon. "They're coming." She moved beside him, coffee cup steady in her hands despite what approached. "How many?" 20, maybe more. He checked his Colt again, a nervous habit. Hartley's turned it into a crusade. They'd spent the night preparing water barrels filled, ammunition counted, windows barricaded, but against a mob. Preparations only went so far. "There's still time," Eloise said quietly. "You could take Rosie, head for the mountains. I'll tell them you forced your way in, that I—" "No." He turned from the window. "We settled this last night." "I know. Had to try once more." She set down her cup, picked up the shotgun. "Then we best get ready for company." The mob stopped at the property line, spreading out like spilled oil. Reverend Hartley sat tall on his black mare, Bible in one hand, the other raised for silence. Behind him, Delaney looked uncomfortable on his rented horse. Pike was there too, arm in a sling, face twisted with pain and fury. "Eloise McCarty," Hartley's voice carried like thunder. "We come in the name of law and Christian justice." She stepped onto the porch, shotgun cradled casual-like, Calder stayed inside, rifle barrel resting on the windowsill. Funny how your Christian justice only shows up when someone tells you no. Reverend woman, you harbor a fugitive, a man who shot officers of the law. I heard he shot bushwhackers hiding in the dark. Different thing entirely. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Not everyone was comfortable with how this was playing out. Calder recognized some faces: merchants, ranchers, men who'd nodded to him on the street. May O'Rourke sat in her buggy at the edge of the group, eyes hard as flint. Hartley raised his Bible higher. Let us pray for guidance. What followed wasn't prayer so much as theater. Hartley called down judgment on the violent man who brings death and the woman who shelters sin. He quoted scripture about submission and obedience, about the natural order ordained by God himself. Some folks shifted uneasily. Others nodded along, caught up in the righteousness of it. Pike added his own commentary, voice slurred with laudanum but vicious, how Calder had attacked without provocation, how Eloise had probably planned it all, the scheming widow looking to protect her latest conquest. Through it all, Eloise stood like stone, letting their words break against her silence. Then something unexpected happened. Dusty Alvarez pushed through the crowd on his paint pony. Followed by old Miguel Rodriguez and his sons, they arranged themselves between the mob and the porch, not many, but enough to complicate things. "This ain't right," Dusty said, voice cracking but determined. "Mrs. McCarty saved my life in that storm. Mr. Boone, too. They're good people." "Boy," Hartley's tone turned dangerous. "You'd best consider your eternal soul before standing with sinners." "My soul's my business, preacher." May O'Rourke climbed down from her buggy with surprising grace. "As is where I choose to stand." She walked through the crowd like it was parting before Moses, climbed the porch steps, and planted herself next to Eloise. Anyone wants to drag folks from their homes, best be prepared to go through a old Irish woman first. Fair warning I bite. A ripple of nervous laughter. The mob's unity was cracking. Then the wind shifted. It came from nowhere, a sudden gust that sent hats flying and horses dancing. But this was no natural wind. It carried the sting of sand, the weight of something meaner. The sky, clear moments before, darkened along the western edge. "Storm coming," someone muttered. "Big one." Hartley tried to hold his ground. The Lord's work doesn't stop for weather. But Calder saw the fear creeping into faces. These were desert people. They knew what that wall of brown meant. Already, horses were fighting their bits, wanting to run. Delaney was the first to break. "Reverend, perhaps we should postpone—" "Silence," Hartley wheeled on him. "Would you let a little wind stop justice?" The little wind chose that moment to slam into them full force. Sand filled the air like grinding teeth. Horses screamed, men cursed, grabbing for bandanas, for anything to cover their faces. "Inside," Eloise shouted to Dusty and the others. "Everyone inside!" The kitchen filled with unlikely allies, Miguel's family. Dusty, May, even a few townspeople who'd been with the mob moments before. Outside. Hartley's righteous army scattered like quail, seeking shelter wherever they could find it. The storm was worse than the one that brought Calder to Eloise's door. This was nature at its most violent, turning day to night, air to sandpaper. The house groaned under the assault, windows rattling in their frames. "This ain't natural," Miguel muttered, crossing himself. "Storm season's past." May snorted. "Natural's got nothing to do with it. This is the land itself saying enough." They huddled together, strange bedfellows brought close by necessity. Calder found himself next to Pike, who'd stumbled in with the others, face green with pain and fear. "Your shoulder needs tending," Eloise said, ever practical. "Don't want nothing from you," Pike snarled. "Then you'll bleed on my clean floor, and I'll still have to mop it up." She gathered supplies, ignoring his protests. As she worked, Pike kept talking. Maybe from pain, maybe from the strange intimacy of shelter in a storm. You don't understand nothing. Hartley promised. Said once Boone was gone, the territory would open up. Investment from back east, real law and order. Whose law? May asked. Whose order? The kind that makes men rich. Calder said quietly. Seen it before. Railroad money. Mining interests. They need the small holders gone first. Understanding dawned on several faces. This wasn't about morality or justice. It was about land and water and profit. The storm raged for hours. When it finally passed, the world outside was transformed. Sand drifted against buildings. Fences were gone. Hartley's black mare lay dead, neck broken in her panic. The Reverend himself stood in the yard, hat gone, dignity shredded. His congregation was scattered, some heading for town. Others simply vanished into the brown haze. This isn't over, he told Eloise, voice raw. You can't fight God's will. Funny thing about God's will, May said. Always seems to line up perfect with what men like you want. Delaney tugged at Hartley's sleeve. Come on, Reverend, it's done for today. They left in ragged groups, the mob become refugees from nature's fury. Pike went last, arm restrapped, pride in tatters. He said nothing, but his eyes promised retribution. When they were gone, Eloise surveyed the damage. Half her new fence was down. The chicken coop was kindling. But the house stood, the barn stood, and they were alive. I'm sorry, Calder said. Your farm will be rebuilt. She looked at the allies who'd stood with them, Miguel and his boys already planning repairs. Dusty gathering scattered tools. May sweeping sand from the porch with aggressive efficiency. You know they'll be back, he said. Yes, but not today. She touched his arm lightly. Today we won. That evening, as they shared a simple meal with their defenders, Eloise stood suddenly. I have something to say. The room quieted. Mister, Boone has been helping me out of kindness. Nothing more. But I see now that kindness isn't enough. Not in this place. She took a breath. So I'm proposing something different. A business arrangement. Calder frowned. Eloise, let me finish. Her voice was steady, but color rose in her cheeks. A labor partnership. We work this land together, share the profits if there ever are any, pool our resources against whatever comes next. No, obligations beyond that. Just two people with common interests making common cause. The room was silent. Then May chuckled. Girl's got sand, I'll give her that. It's a good plan, Miguel said slowly. Strength in numbers. We've all seen that today. Calder stood, feeling the weight of the moment. You sure about this? I'm sure I'm tired of fighting alone. I'm sure they won't stop until we make them. She met his eyes. I'm sure that whatever's growing here is worth protecting. The question is, are you... He thought about the life he'd planned, quiet, solitary, free from complications. Then he looked at this woman who faced mobs with a shotgun and offered partnership like a challenge. Yes, he said simply, I am. She held out her hand. Formal as any business deal. He took it, feeling the calluses, the strength, the promise of shared labor and shared purpose. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, but this time it sounded like hope. The days after the storm fell into rhythm, hard work under hard sun, rebuilding what nature and men had torn down. Calder moved his few belongings to the tack room in Eloise's barn, their business arrangement requiring proximity but maintaining propriety. The town watched, whispered, waited for scandal that didn't come. Instead, they saw something worse success. The new irrigation channels Calder designed caught and held the storm's gift of moisture. Seeds that should have withered in the drought sent up green shoots. The McCarty place, dying by degrees for 2 years, began to breathe again. On this particular evening, they worked late spreading dried beans for storage. The barn smelled of harvest and hope. lantern light casting long shadows as they moved in practiced tandem. No words needed, she'd spread the cloth. He'd pour the beans. Together they'd pick out stones and chaff. "Never seen beans this good in a drought year," Eloise said, running the smooth seeds through her fingers. That new channel made the difference. Water lasted twice as long. She smiled, a real one, not the careful half measures she usually allowed. Tom would have liked that. He was always sketching plans for better irrigation, just never had the engineering knowledge to build them. "You miss him." It wasn't a question. "I miss having a partner." She paused, considering. "Not the same as missing him specifically. That makes me sound cold." "Makes you sound honest." They worked in comfortable silence until the last beans were sorted. Outside, insects sang their evening chorus, and somewhere a screech owl called, the kind of night that made the desert seem gentle, almost welcoming. "Coffee?" Eloise asked. "Real coffee? May brought some from town." They sat on the porch steps, cups warm in their hands, watching stars emerge. The night was soft around them, intimate as a whispered secret. "Can I ask you something?" Eloise's voice was quiet. "About Dry Creek." Calder tensed. "What do you want to know?" "What really happened?" He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I was tracking rustlers. Railroad hired me to find who was hitting their supply trains. Trail led to a mining camp outside Dry Creek. The owner, Garrison, was storing stolen dynamite in an old shed, planning to blast a competing claim." He sipped his coffee, gathering words. "I went to the sheriff, told him what I'd found. He said he'd handle it. Next day, that shed exploded. 5 men dead, including 2 of Garrison's rivals." He laughed bitterly. "Convenient, wasn't it?" "The sheriff was in on it." "Bought and paid for. But Garrison was smart, made sure all the paperwork pointed to me, the dangerous outsider, the hired gun who got careless." He set down his cup, hands clenching. Judge saw through it. Eventually, jury too, but by then the story had legs. Truth never caught up. Eloise touched his arm lightly. "So, you've been running from a lie?" "Running from what people need to believe. Sometimes that's stronger than any truth." She turned to face him fully, and in the lamplight spilling from the kitchen, her eyes were dark as deep water. "I'm tired of lies, tired of what people think they know, tired of being careful." Something shifted in the air between them, delicate as spider silk and twice as strong. Calder felt it, that pull he'd been fighting since the day she'd opened her door in a dust storm. "Eloise?" She leaned closer, voice dropping to barely above a whisper. They promised him a quiet bride. Her breath was warm against his ear, sending shivers down his spine. But her first whisper wrapped him in fierce, sweet madness. The words hung between them like a challenge, a confession, a door opening to possibility. Calder turned his head, found her inches away, close enough to see the pulse fluttering at her throat. "Is that what you are, a quiet bride?" "I'm nobody's bride." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining. "But I could be yours, not quiet, not promised by anyone but myself, just yours." He kissed her then, slow and careful, like she was something that might break or vanish. She made a soft sound, surprise or welcome or both, and leaned into him, solid and real, and there. When they broke apart, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. After Tom, I didn't think I'd want this again." "We don't have to." "Yes, we do." She stood, tugging his hand. "I'm done being afraid. Calder, done living half a life because full might hurt too much." They moved inside, leaving the coffee cups on the steps. In the kitchen, she turned to face him, hands going to the pins in her hair. It fell around her shoulders in waves, and he realized he'd never seen it fully down before. "You're beautiful." The words came out rough, honest. She smiled, that full smile that transformed her face. "You're not so bad yourself," for a dangerous man. They came together again, less careful now, hands relearning what it meant to touch and be touched. Her fingers traced the scar on his ribs, still tender from Pike's ambush. His hands tangled in her hair, marveling at the silk of it. "Wait," she pulled back slightly. "I need to say this proper." She took his face in her hands, looking him straight in the eye. "I'm choosing this, choosing you. Not because I need protection, not because the town expects it, not for water rights or convenience or any reason, but this I want you here, with me. Do you understand?" "I understand." He covered her hands with his. "I'm choosing too. No more running, no more being alone because it's safer." They moved to her small bedroom, shy as newlyweds despite their ages and experiences. The narrow bed creaked under their combined weight, making them laugh nervous. Giddy laughter that broke the last of the barriers between them. What followed was tender and fierce by turns. Two people who'd forgotten the comfort of another's warmth, remembering all at once. They mapped each other's scars, his from violence, hers from work and loss. They whispered things that only darkness could hold, promises too fragile for daylight. Later, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. The old quilt covered them both, worn soft by years of use. "The town will have opinions about this," she said. "Let them. Hartley will call down hellfire. He's been doing that anyway." She propped herself on an elbow, hair falling like a curtain. "This changes things, our arrangement. Everything's been changing since the day I rode into Dust Mercy." He tucked a strand behind her ear. "Question is, what do we want it to change into? Something real, something that lasts." She traced patterns on his chest, thinking, maybe we make it official. A real marriage, not just a business arrangement. That would solve the water rights, give us legal standing. "Is that a proposal, Miss McCarty?" "It's a negotiation, Mr. Boone," but she was smiling. "Terms to be discussed, mutual benefit to be assessed." He rolled them over, making her laugh. "I accept your terms, whatever they are." "You haven't heard them yet." "Don't need to. If you're offering, I'm accepting." She pulled him down for a kiss, whispering against his lips. "See, not quiet at all." They loved again as the night deepened. Slower this time, learning the rhythms of together, outside. A rare desert rain began to fall, gentle as a blessing. The drops on the roof made music, a counterpoint to their breathing, their whispered endearments, their surprised joy at finding each other in this harsh land. Near dawn, Calder woke to find Eloise at the window, wrapped in the quilt, watching the rain. He joined her, arms around her waist, chin on her shoulder. Penny for them. "Just thinking how strange life is. 2 years ago, I was sure I'd never... That part of my life was over." She leaned back against him. "Now here we are, planning a future like the young folks do." "Nothing wrong with that." "No, nothing wrong at all." She turned in his arms. "We should probably talk practical matters, if we're really doing this. In the morning, when the sun's up and the coffee's hot." "It is morning." "Later morning, then..." He kissed her forehead. "Right now, I just want to hold you and listen to the rain." She softened against him. "That sounds perfect." They went back to bed as the sky lightened, curled together like quotation marks around a shared story. The rain continued, steady and sure, washing the dust from the world and bringing the desert to brief, beautiful life. When they finally rose, the sun was high and the air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. They dressed slowly, hands lingering, small touches affirming what the night had built between them. Over breakfast eggs from her chickens, biscuits from her oven, they talked plans. A simple wedding, just friends and witnesses, combined resources to buy the adjoining section if it came available. Maybe a milk cow. Definitely more chickens. Dreams modest as morning glory, and twice as likely to bloom with tending. "We'll need to tell May first," Eloise said. "She'll want to organize something, and it's better to let her. And Miguel, he'll want to stand witness. Dusty will be over the moon. He's been making calf eyes at that school teacher. Thinks nobody notices." They smiled at each other across the table. Conspirators now in the best possible way. Whatever came next. Hartley's fury. Pike's revenge. Delaney's schemes, they'd face it together. The promised quiet bride had found her voice, and it sang of strength and choice and a love earned through trial. The dangerous man had found his home, not in a place, but in a person who saw past the stories to the truth. Outside, the desert bloomed in the rain's wake, proof that even the driest ground could yield beauty when the conditions were right. Inside, two people who'd thought themselves past such things discovered that the heart, like the land, could always surprise you with what it held in reserve. Dawn came bitter with alkali dust and the promise of violence. Calder woke to hoofbeats too many, too fast, too early for honest business. He rolled from the bed, reaching for his gun belt, finding Eloise already at the window with the shotgun. "How many?" he asked, pulling on his boots. 20, maybe 25. Pike's leading them." She glanced back, face calm but eyes sharp. "They've got men from Dry Creek with them." His blood chilled. Dry Creek meant bounty hunters, professionals who wouldn't scatter at the first sign of resistance. Through the window, he could see them spreading out, surrounding the house with practiced efficiency. Calder Boone, a stranger's voice, hard and certain. "This is Marshal William Tate from Dry Creek. I've got federal paper on you. Come out peaceful, and nobody needs to get hurt." Federal marshals don't ride with town sheriffs who ambush people. Calder called back. "That's between you and the judge. My job's to bring you in. How that happens is up to you." Eloise touched his arm. "The root cellar. You could—" "No, running's done." He checked his Colt, then the Winchester. "But you don't need to be part of this. Tell them I forced—" "Stop!" Her voice was fierce. "We settled this last night. Together means together." Before he could respond, another voice rang out, young, urgent. "Mrs. McCarty, Mr. Boone, don't come out." Dusty Alvarez came racing across the field on his paint pony, something white clutched in his raised hand. Two of Pike's men moved to intercept him, but he swerved past, riding like his life depended on it. "I got proof," the boy shouted. "From Delaney, safe proof about everything." A shot cracked. Dusty's horse screamed, stumbling, sending the boy flying. He hit hard, rolled, came up running. More shots followed, kicking up dust at his feet. Calder didn't think. He went through the door low and fast, Eloise right behind him. They laid down covering fire, driving Pike's men back long enough for Dusty to dive behind the water trough. "You just made this worse." "Boone," Tate shouted, "aiding a thief, shooting at lawmen." "Your lawmen just tried to gun down an unarmed boy." Eloise's voice rang with fury. "What kind of justice is that?" The morning sun climbed higher, turning the standoff into a furnace. Calder could see men taking positions behind the barn, the chicken coop, anywhere with cover. Professional placement. These weren't Pike's usual bullies. "What proof, Dusty?" he called quietly. The boy was bleeding from a gash on his forehead, but grinning despite it. "Delaney's ledgers, letters from back east. They're planning to steal half the valley once you're gone. Got investors and everything. Even got papers saying they already own land that ain't been sold yet." "How did you—" "His nephew works in the bank. Good kid. Hates what his uncle's doing. We broke in last night, copied everything." Dusty pulled crumpled papers from inside his shirt. "Even found the receipt for the kerosene they used on your hayshed. Mrs. McCarty." A dust devil chose that moment to dance across the yard, swirling between the opposing forces like nature's commentary. In the confusion of grit and wind, Calder saw movement men working around to the blind side of the house. "They're flanking us," he told Eloise. She nodded, already moving. I'll take the back. You watch the front. Wait! But she was gone, slipping through the house quiet as smoke. More riders appeared on the horizon. Calder's heart sank. Reinforcements for Pike? Probably. But as they drew closer, he recognized May O'Rourke's buggy in the lead, followed by Miguel Rodriguez and his sons, the widow Carson and her 2 grown boys, even Thomas Chen from the Chinese laundry with several of his countrymen. They rode straight through Pike's line, ignoring shouted threats, and arranged themselves around the house. May climbed down from her buggy carrying, improbably, a massive coffee pot. Thought you folks might be thirsty, she called cheerfully. Nothing like fresh coffee for a morning siege. This is law business, old woman. Tate emerged from cover, badge glinting. Interfere and I'll arrest the lot of you. On what charge? May poured coffee with steady hands. Neighborliness caffeine distribution. More townsfolk were arriving, some Pike had probably counted as allies. They didn't take sides exactly, but their presence changed the arithmetic. Too many witnesses now, too many voters, too many people who'd started asking questions about Delaney's plans. That's when Pike lost his temper. Enough! He stalked forward, gun drawn. Boone, you're coming with us if I have to drag you, and that thieving Mexican brat's going to jail for burglary. Over my dead body, Eloise said quietly. She'd circled back, now stood beside Calder, shotgun level. That can be arranged, woman. Pike's face was ugly with rage and pain from his wounded shoulder. You'd shoot a lady. This from Mei Chen, Thomas's daughter, who'd appeared with several young women from the town, in front of all these witnesses. Pike, Tate's voice held warning. Stand down. This isn't how we do things. To hell with how you do things. Pike swung his gun toward Dusty. That boy's a thief, and these 2 are harboring him. Everything happened at once. Pike's gun barked. Dusty cried out, clutching his arm. Calder's Colt thundered in response, catching Pike's center mass, spinning him into the dust. Women screamed, men shouted, horses reared. And in the middle of it all, a new voice roared, Enough! Judge Samuel Fredericks of the Territorial Court stood in May's buggy, raised arms demanding attention. He was a small man made large by authority, with silver hair and eyes like winter. Marshal Tate, you will order your men to lower their weapons. Now. Tate hesitated, then complied. The Dry Creek men looked confused, but obeyed. Now then. Fredericks climbed down, walked to where Pike lay groaning in the dirt. Someone want to explain why a temporary sheriff was about to shoot an unarmed boy. The boy's a thief, Your Honor, Tate said carefully. Broke into Josiah Delaney's office. Is that so? Fredericks turned to Dusty, who was being tended by Mei Chen. What do you have to say, young man? I found evidence, sir, about crimes. Figured you should see it. Convenient timing, Your Honor showing up. Delaney had appeared, trying for calm but sweating through his shirt. Not really. Fredericks smiled thinly. I received a telegram 3 days ago. Anonymous, but very detailed, about land schemes, false witnesses, forged documents. Thought I should investigate personally. He looked at May. Telegrams are wonderful inventions, aren't they, Mrs. O'Rourke? May smiled innocently. Oh, yes, Your Honor. Very modern. Marshal Tate. Fredericks turned serious. I've reviewed the Dry Creek matter extensively. The warrant you're carrying is based on perjured testimony from men now dead or disappeared. It's worthless. Your Honor, I was told. You were lied to, as was I, initially. He looked at Calder. Mr. Boone, you're free to go about your business, with the court's apologies. What about him? Eloise pointed at Pike, who was being bandaged by one of the Dry Creek men. Attempted murder, conspiracy, Probably more once I review these documents. Fredericks accepted the papers from Dusty. Marshall Tate, you'll take him into custody. Real custody this time. What? What about my store? Delaney's voice cracked. Fredericks flipped through the papers, face darkening. According to these, you've been claiming ownership of land that belongs to others, including Mrs. McCarty's farm. That's fraud. Mr. Delaney, federal fraud. He signaled two of Tate's men. Take him too. As Pike and Delaney were led away, Reverend Hartley pushed through the crowd. Your Honor, surely you can see the moral decay here. An unmarried woman, living with... Reverend. Fredericks's voice could have frozen hell. I've been reading about you too. About church funds diverted to private land deals. About sermons that sound more like political rallies than spiritual guidance. He paused. You might want to consider a new calling, elsewhere. Hartley's face went from red to white to gray. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his rigid back the only sign of his fury. As the crowd began to disperse, Fredericks approached Calder and Eloise. You two have had quite a morning. Yes, sir, Calder said. Thank you for... Don't thank me. Thank whoever sent that telegram. He winked at May, who was distributing the last of her coffee. And maybe consider making your arrangement official. Easier all around, legally speaking. Already planning on it. Your Honor, Eloise said, taking Calder's hand. Good. I'll be in town a few days. Happy to officiate if you need. He tipped his hat. Now, I believe young Mr. Alvarez needs medical attention, and then we'll discuss his future. Bright boy like that might make a good law clerk, better than breaking into offices. As the dust settled and the yard emptied, Calder and Eloise stood together, still half expecting more violence. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by friends Miguel organizing repair crews, May planning a wedding celebration, Dusty grinning through his bandages and already flirting with May-Chin. It's over, Eloise said, wonder in her voice. This part, anyway. Calder pulled her close. Still got a farm to run. Still got people who won't approve. Let them disapprove. She lifted her face to his. We've got work to do, together. He kissed her there in the morning sun. In full view of whoever cared to look, somewhere a meadowlark sang, and the wind for once was gentle. And the McCarty place, soon to be the Boone place, too, stood ready for whatever came next. The quiet bride had found her voice, raised it in defense of truth, and discovered that sometimes the best whisper is the one that becomes a shout when justice demands it. The weeks after the confrontation brought changes swift as spring water after a thaw. Dust Mercy found itself without a general store when Delaney's closed, his assets frozen by federal marshals within days. The widow Carson and her sons had cleaned out the old saddle shop and opened a fair goods market. Prices dropped to what folks could actually pay, and credit came with kindness instead of calculation. The church stood empty after Hartley fled in the night, taking only what he could carry and leaving behind ledgers that revealed more than any sermon about the wages of sin. Young Father Miguel Santana arrived 2 weeks later, a soft-spoken man who preached in Spanish and English both, and whose first sermon was about the Good Samaritan. God's love, he said, looking directly at Eloise in the front pew, shows itself in works, not words. The changes at the McCarty place, now the Boone place, were quieter but deeper. Calder's engineering transformed trickles into streams, channeling every drop of moisture to where it could do the most good. The withered garden bloomed with squash and beans and corn. Neighbors who'd kept their distance began dropping by with offers of help, seed stock, breeding pairs. On this particular morning, 2 weeks before the planned wedding, Eloise stood in that garden watching green things grow. The sunrise painted the desert in shades of gold and rose, and she found herself talking to Tom's grave on the hill, a habit she'd developed over the lonely months. I hope you understand, she said quietly. I'll always be grateful for what we had, but it's time to live forward instead of backward. Talking to yourself again. Calder appeared with coffee, his presence steady as the mountains on the horizon. Talking to the past, letting it know the future's here. He handed her the cup, then wrapped his arms around her from behind. They stood that way, watching the light creep across their land, theirs now, in every way that mattered. "May's coming by today," Eloise said. "Final wedding plans. She's threatening to invite the whole territory. Let her. We've got nothing to hide." "Dusty wants to know if he can bring Mei Chen. That boy works fast," says the man who proposed after knowing me a month. "Took me that long to work up the nerve." She laughed, leaning back against him. These moments of simple happiness still surprised her, how easy joy could be when you stopped fighting it. The sound of wagons interrupted their peace. Not one or two, but a convoy, raising dust like a small army. Calder tensed, hand moving automatically to where his gun usually hung. "Wait," Eloise said, squinting. "That's Miguel's wagon, and the Chen's, and is that lumber?" It was wagon after wagon of lumber, nails, shingles, glass panes. The whole town, it seemed, had come to raise a barn. Not just any barn, a proper one, big enough for the expanded operation they'd dreamed about over late-night coffee and early morning planning. "We didn't ask for this," Calder said, stunned. "No." May O'Rourke climbed down from her buggy, grinning like a cat with cream. "But you didn't have to. That's what community does, sees a need and fills it." By noon, the skeleton of the barn rose against the sky. Men who'd ridden with Pike's mob now worked alongside those who'd stood against them, past divisions dissolving in shared labor. Women had set up outdoor kitchens, and the smell of cooking filled the air, stews and bread and pies, enough to feed an army. Young Father Santana blessed the work in 2 languages, then picked up a hammer himself. "Faith without works," he said cheerfully, "is like adobe without straw." Dusty and Mei Chen worked side by side, passing nails and stealing glances. Other young couples followed their lead, the barn raising becoming an informal courtship ground under the watchful eyes of parents and May's strategic meddling. "Look at them," Eloise said to Calder during a water break. "Building more than a barn. Building a future." He agreed, one board at a time. As the sun peaked, a lone rider appeared on the horizon. The work slowed as people recognized the former sheriff's distinctive bulk. Pike rode slowly, favoring his healing wounds, face unreadable under the shadow of his hat. "Trouble," someone muttered. Calder stepped forward, but Pike raised an empty hand. "Not here for trouble, here to—" He struggled with the words. "Here to make things right." He dismounted carefully, pulled a folded paper from his vest. "This is a signed confession about the fire, the ambush, all of it. Judge says if I testify against Delaney's Eastern partners, I might get prison instead of the rope." "Why tell us?" Eloise asked. Pike looked older, deflated. "Because I've got a daughter back in Missouri. Haven't seen her in 10 years. If I'm going away, I want her to know her father finally did one honest thing." He handed the paper to Calder. "This clears your name complete. Dry Creek. Everything." He turned to go, then stopped. "That barn's going up crooked on the north corner. Might want to check it." After he left, the work resumed with renewed energy. By sunset, the barn stood complete, not pretty, maybe, but solid and true. The community gathered in its shade for supper, long tables groaning under the weight of shared food. Father Santana stood to speak. "In Ecclesiastes, we read 2 are better than 1, for they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, 1 will lift up his companion." He smiled at Calder and Eloise. "Today, we've all lifted each other. This is how we build not just barns, but homes, communities, lives worth living." As stars began to appear, instruments came out, guitars, fiddles, a concertina someone had packed just in case. Music filled the desert night, and despite exhaustion, people danced. Calder watched Eloise swing past in Miguel's careful arms, her face bright with laughter. "Never seen her so happy," May said, appearing at his elbow. "Never felt so happy myself." "Good. You both earned it." She paused. "You know there's still talk. Always will be. About how you two started. About the past." "Let them talk." "That's the spirit." May patted his arm. "Now go dance with your bride-to-be before Miguel wears out his old bones." Calder cut in, gathering Eloise close as a waltz began. She was warm and solid in his arms, smelling of sawdust and sunshine. "Regrets?" she asked. "Only that we didn't do this sooner." "Liar, you loved every minute of the drama." "Maybe a little." They swayed together, finding their rhythm. Around them, the community that had once fractured was knitting itself back together. One dance, one shared meal, one act of kindness at a time. "I've been thinking," Eloise said, "about that empty storefront in town." "Oh." "Dusty needs work. He's clever with numbers, honest as daylight. Maybe a small goods store, fair prices, community-owned. Already planning to save the world." "Just our little piece of it." She looked up at him. "Is that foolish?" "No more foolish than anything else we've done." The music wound down, but people lingered, reluctant to let the day end. Children slept in wagons while adults talked quietly, planning future gatherings, shared harvests, mutual aid. "This is what we built," Eloise said softly. "Not just the barn. This, worth fighting for. Worth staying for." As the evening ended and wagons rolled away, calls of "see you at the wedding" floating on the night air. Calder and Eloise stood before their new barn. Inside, it smelled of fresh wood and possibility. 2 weeks, she said, having second thoughts. "No." She took his hand. "Just thinking how strange it is. A year ago, I thought my life was over. Now I can't wait to see what comes next." They walked back to the house hand in hand, the new barn throwing moon shadows across the yard. Behind them, the desert stretched endless and unforgiving. But here, in this small space carved from wildness, something good was growing. The Widow McCarty Fund. Eloise's idea would launch next month, using part of their harvest profits to help other women keep their lands and their independence. The community store would open with Dusty as manager and fair practices as policy. Father Santana would bless it all in 2 languages, building bridges word by word. And in 2 weeks, in a simple ceremony with complex meaning, a man who'd run from his past and a woman who'd been trapped by hers would join their futures together. Not because they had to, not because the town expected it, but because they'd chosen each other on the far side of hardship. The quiet bride had found her voice and used it to change her world. The dangerous man had found his home and helped to build it. Together, they discovered that the best partnerships are forged in fire and tempered with trust. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did in the desert. But tonight, there was starlight and satisfaction and the sweet exhaustion that comes from good work shared with good people. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The stranger arrived on their wedding day. Calder spotted him first, a man in an expensive suit stepping down from the morning stage, looking as out of place in dust mercy as a peacock in a chicken coop, while the town bustled with wedding preparations. The stranger made his way to the land office, briefcase in hand. "Trouble?" Eloise asked, adjusting her simple blue dress. She'd refused white, "I'm no blushing maiden," but the blue brought out her eyes and made her look younger. Hopeful. Maybe, maybe not. Calder straightened his own jacket, borrowed from Miguel and smelling faintly of cedar. "Let's get married first. Then we'll handle whatever comes." The ceremony was held under the cottonwood tree her parents had planted, its shade sheltering half the town. Father Santana spoke words in Spanish and English about commitment and courage. May stood witness for Eloise. tears streaming down her weathered face. Miguel stood for Calder, dignified despite his patched trousers. "Do you, Calder, take this woman?" "I do. No hesitation. No doubt." "Do you, Eloise, take this man?" "With all my heart." When they kissed, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in Santa Fe. Even crusty ranchers dabbed at their eyes. Dusty and Mei Chen held hands, dreaming of their own future day. But as the celebration moved to May's boarding house for the reception, Calder noticed the stranger again, now talking earnestly with Judge Fredericks. The judge's expression grew increasingly grave. During a lull in the festivities, Fredericks approached the newlyweds. "Hate to interrupt, but there's a matter needs addressing." The stranger joined them younger up close, with ink-stained fingers and nervous energy. "Mr. Boone, Mrs. Boone, I'm James Morrison from the Eastern Development Company." Eloise's hand tightened on Calder's arm. They'd heard that name in Delaney's papers, the investors behind the land grab scheme. "If you're here to—" Calder began. "No," Morrison held up his hands. "I'm here to make amends. When we learned of Delaney's methods, the board was horrified. We're businessmen, not thieves." He opened his briefcase. "I'm authorized to make you an offer. Fair market value for your land, plus 20% for the inconvenience." The sum he named was staggering enough to buy a ranch in California, start fresh anywhere they wanted. "Not interested," Eloise said flatly. Morrison blinked. "You haven't heard the full offer. We'd also—" "Sir," Calder interrupted gently. "My wife said no. This land isn't for sale. But surely you understand the development potential. The railroad's coming through within 2 years. This whole valley will boom. You could be rich." "We are rich," Eloise said. "We have good land, good neighbors, and work that matters. What else is wealth?" Morrison looked helplessly at Judge Fredericks, who shrugged. "You heard them, son. Best head back east and tell your board to look elsewhere." As Morrison retreated, Fredericks smiled. "You know he'll be back. Men like that always are." "Let them come," Calder said. "This ground's been fought for and won. We're not giving it up for any amount of paper money." They returned to the celebration, but within an hour, another interruption, this time from Dusty, racing in with news. "There's a family at the edge of town. Their wagon broke down. They got nothing, kids are hungry." Without hesitation, Eloise began packing food. "How many?" "4 little ones. Parents look worn to the bone." Within minutes, half the wedding party was loading wagons. This was what community meant. Celebration could wait when neighbors needed help. They found the family huddled by their broken wagon, the Jacobsons from Kansas, fleeing drought and foreclosure. The children, ranging from toddler to 10 years old, watched with hollow eyes as the townspeople approached. "We don't want charity," Mr. Jacobson said weakly. "Good thing we're not offering any," May said briskly. "We're offering opportunity. You willing to work?" Hope flickered in tired faces. "Yes, ma'am, anything." As the women tended the children and men fixed the wagon, Calder pulled Eloise aside. "The old Baxter place is empty. Good land. Just needs work." "And the Widows' Fund could stake them for seed and supplies," she added. "Give them the same chance we had." By sunset, the Jacobsons were installed in the abandoned farmhouse, their children fed and bathed, their wagon repaired. The wedding party had become a working party, everyone pitching in to make the house livable. "This wasn't how I pictured our wedding day," Eloise said, sweeping dust from the Jacobsons' floor. "Disappointed," she smiled at him. "Beautiful despite the dirt and exhaustion. No, this is perfect. This is who we are." Later, back at their own home, they finally had quiet. The celebration had continued without them, understanding that some things mattered more than cake and dancing. "Mrs. Boone," Calder said, testing the words. "Mr. Boone," she replied. then laughed. "We're married." "Seems so. Any regrets?" "Just one." She moved into his arms. "That we can't do it again tomorrow." They sat on their porch, watching stars emerge. In the distance, they could see lamplight in the Jacobson house, new hope kindled from old despair. Morrison was right about one thing. Calder said, "The railroad is coming. Everything's going to change. Then we'd better be ready." Eloise was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking, when the boom comes, people like the Jacobsons will need protection from people like Morrison. Maybe we should talk to Judge Fredericks about land trusts, community ownership models." "Already planning, and we've been married." He checked his pocket watch. 6 hours. "I told you I wasn't a quiet bride." He pulled her closer. "Wouldn't have you any other way." A coyote called in the darkness, answered by another. The desert's night music, unchanged by human ambitions. Tomorrow there would be work. There was always work. The Jacobsons would need help getting started. The new store would need stocking. The Widow's Fund required organizing. But tonight was theirs. Two people who'd found each other across loss and hardship, who'd fought for their place and won the right to shape it. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Eloise said softly. "That first night you stayed here, during the storm. You could have ridden on after. Why didn't you?" Calder considered. "Same reason you opened the door. Sometimes you recognize home before you understand what you're seeing." She raised up to whisper in his ear, playful now. "They promised you a quiet bride. Are you terribly disappointed?" "Woman," he said, catching her close. "You've brought me nothing but beautiful chaos since the day we met." He grinned. "I'm counting on a lifetime more of it." "Only a lifetime." "To start with." They went inside then to begin that lifetime properly. Behind them, Dust Mercy slept under familiar stars. But changes were coming had already begun. The community store would open next week. 3 more families would apply to the Widow's Fund this month. The school would need expansion as children arrived with each wagon train. And at the center of it all, 2 people who'd learned that the strongest foundations were built on shared work and mutual choice. The promised quiet bride had become a force of nature. The dangerous man had become a builder of futures. Their story was really just beginning. But that's the way of the best stories. They don't end with happily ever after. They continue with, and then they got to work. Because real happiness isn't a destination, but a journey taken hand in hand. In the morning, there would be coffee and planning, neighbors to help and fields to tend. The Jacobson children would need school supplies. The irrigation channels required maintenance. Life, in all its demanding beauty, would call them to action. But for tonight, in their small house on the edge of forever, Calder Boone and Eloise McCarty Boone were exactly where they belonged together, at the beginning of everything. The desert wind sang through the cottonwoods, and somewhere in that song was a promise that love could grow even in the hardest ground. That community could flourish in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the best answer to a whisper is to listen with your whole heart and respond with your whole life. They were, and it was enough to build a world on. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what you thought of Calder and Eloise's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories of love, courage, and community in the Old West. Don't forget to like this video and hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of the human spirit triumphing against all odds.